years in my twice terms in the government. I mean, the experts have biases, Vivek. That's what I'm getting at. It isn't the data. It's the bias that you have to watch out for. And I think we ought to have, let's say, honest experts or an honest bureaucracy, or even better, Vivek, a smaller bureaucracy.
Yeah, I would say non-existent bureaucracy at its best, Larry, because the path to truth, it actually runs through free speech and open debate. It runs through an open exchange of ideas. That's what the scientific method actually depends on, is a kind of intellectual humility. The idea that no person, no matter how many letters they have after their name, has actual all-knowing knowledge. Nobody's God. That's what actually the pursuit of science and the pursuit of understanding of knowledge actually depends on. The trap we've fallen into in the last several years in the country, culturally, is believing that somehow trusting the science, the capital S science, means you're trusting some human being who themselves is actually flawed. Be that Anthony Fauci or the people who proclaimed in favor of school lockdowns that we now regret. The same thing goes for a lot of our economic policies as well. The same goes for, by the way, Larry, you know this well, for the so-called expert class at the Federal Reserve. It's like a drunken patron at a bar throwing a dart at two arrows at the same time, badly missing on both, inflation and unemployment, instead focusing on dollar stability, which was actually the fashionable thing to do in the 1970s, long before you got the expert class at the Fed. So economic policy, monetary policy, health policy, one thing we've learned is we need more open debate and accountability rather than an expert class that's insulated from accountability. And believe me, if I have anything to do with it, Larry, you have my word, that's exactly what we're going to restore in this country, is getting rid of that managerial class and reviving actual accountability at every layer of our government. And that is something we're missing today.
Well, we're rooting for you. Everybody's rooting for you to do that. You know, Vivek, just on the debate, one more shot. I mean, I thought J.D. Vance was so smart. Look, what did he do? He picked a handful of issues, just 3 or 4 issues, key issues. I mean, inflation, incomes, affordability, immigration, and 3.5 years or 1,400 days, and kept talking about them and coming back to them and repeating them. Those are the issues that people care about. And I think Waltz was just tied up in knots. He didn't know what to do with it. And if they disagreed, J.D. would say, well, yeah, maybe you have a point, which is a nice, friendly thing to say, but you should have done it 1,400 days ago. That kind of stuff. I mean, I want to say in some sense it was Reagan-esque because he only took a couple of points and just kept hammering away. That's what the Gipper used to do.
Yeah, well, look, I think the reality is every time we have a policy-focused debate, our side actually wins. I'm incredibly proud of J.D. He did a great job of being an outstanding messenger last night. But it's also a lesson for us that we're on the right side of these policy questions from economic policy, how to combat inflation, how to actually end the rampant wave of crime in this country, how to solve the illegal mass immigration crisis into this country. And even in a deeper sense, Larry, I spoke at Liberty University to about 8,000 young people earlier this morning, how to revive national pride in this country. We're on the winning side of those issues. And so the more we're focused on our own substantive vision for the country, the better off our movement and our party and our country is going to be. I think that's one of the lessons we've learned time and again. I think that's going to serve us well between now and November 5th. And if we stick to our vision for the country, I think this shouldn't even be a close election. I think we should win not just by a little bit, but potentially in a unifying landslide of the kind that the Gipper delivered, Reagan delivered in 1980 and 1984. I think that's possible. I don't think that's out of reach, and I think that would be good for the future of the country. That's what I'm rooting for and working hard to make sure we actually see happen.
All right, Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you, sir. As always, we love your wisdom. Please come back soon.
Donald Trump hitting back after the judge in his election interference case dropped an October surprise, unsealing a key filing from special counsel Jack Smith's January 6 case. It's a hefty document coming in at 165 pages, laying out Smith's case and alleged evidence he'll use in an eventual trial against the former president. Trump reacting on Truth Social by calling it, quote, complete and total election interference. I did nothing wrong. They did. Andy McCarthy calling out the timing when I asked him about it earlier.
Good job, Dana.
The point of this was to try to get this information, which has been hashed out again and again before the American people. None of this is new, but the idea was to get the evidence out in as spectacular a way as possible. The point of releasing this now can only be to affect the election. There's no legal need for it.
Some in the media, though, they see an opportunity. This might have been the October surprise they were hoping for, hoping that Jack Smith's filing will make Republicans rethink their support for the former president. Take a look.
Charlie, for the, handful of voters who are maybe former Nikki Haley supporters or just Republicans who need to be reminded once more why they should not be voting for Donald Trump, do you think it would be effective for Vice President Harris to talk about this in whatever way legally she is allowed to on the campaign trail?
Greg, I know that a lot of people say there were bombshells in here. I mean, I read it and I felt like I'd heard and seen all of this before.
They're trying to revive the corpse of January 6th. I have to say, though, this is an improvement over 2020 because in this case, this election interference is done right in front of you, from a combination of lawfare and the media embrace. You got to go back to February 4th, 2021, when Time magazine published an article boasting of the conspiracy of business titans and left-wing activists to oppose what they called Trump's assault on democracy. They described it as a vast shadow effort, an organized collection of operatives that changed voting systems and laws, secured hundreds of millions of dollars in public and private funding. They recruited armies of poll workers, got millions to vote by mail. Then they went after disinformation. They pressured social media companies. They called that election protection. So we, Republicans, independents, libertarians, we're suspicious when we're told that our side or the person we support is an existential risk. We were told that everything was on the table, that in fact, if you didn't cheat, that would be immoral. So what they did was they suppressed Hunter's laptop, which ushered in Joe's ill-gotten victory. So the suspicion of a rigged election is more than justified because you told us that. You told us what you were going to do. So I think that's an important context when you approach a January 6th. It wasn't an attempt to overthrow the government. It was like, we're just reacting to what you guys said.
Judge Andy McCarthy explained today that there's no written rule that you don't do this before 30 days, but it was kind of an unwritten rule. But all these norms have been broken.
Yeah, well, there's no question that the Department of Justice has had regulations over the years that say whenever there is an election on a state or national level, you do not release, number one, an investigation, an indictment, anything that may impact the election. And I always thought that it was 90 days. And but it's clear here that what the judge did, Judge Chutkan, with her briefing and her motions calendar, she made it so that Jack Smith would be able to submit his papers on this date. And the former president, should have his answers by October 17th. Now, I just heard that was changed about an hour ago until after the election. But at least if they had gotten their response in by the president's team, you could have had somewhat of a balanced review of this. This is definitely election interference, and it's an attempt, as the press made clear, to try to remind voters you shouldn't vote for this guy because of all these things he did. There's nothing new in this. It's the same old stuff over and over again, where Hunter Biden got the benefit of every doubt in every calendar, in every schedule, and every statute of limitations. They're doing whatever they can to hurt Donald Trump. And what's amazing is, do you recall the sentencing for Donald Trump in New York City by Judge Ergeron was delayed because he didn't want to impact the election. which is kind of amazing because he's about as biased, I thought, as you could get. But this judge, Chutkan, is even worse. She's like, let's let it all hang out right before the election.
And Jessica, this everything about January 6th or everything about all the legal conundrums that Trump finds himself in hasn't dented his support with Republicans. And so a lot of the media on the left were saying, oh, this is it. This is going to be the one. But do you think it's going to be the thing that turns Republicans against voting for him?
No, I don't think so. And it has never polled as such. There are people who are persuaded by the argument that there is one party that cares about protecting democracy, and there's another party that will undermine.
I'm actually friends with Peter Singer, who's a very well-known secular utilitarian philosopher. We don't agree on many, many things, but I think he's wrong in really interesting ways. And he's seen, and since the 70s, he's seen what it has meant to reject a Christian ethic of human life. And he said very explicitly, if you're pro-choice for abortion, you also need to be pro-choice for infanticide. He's right about that. Just to work the other way. If we're protecting babies, we should protect prenatal babies as well. But interestingly, he says it really wasn't abortion that was the first moment where we decided to say being human doesn't matter. It was brain death. So around the time of the 60s and 70s, when a lot of stuff went down that involved cultural shifts, there was a confluence of two inventions. The first was the ventilator, so a machine that helps people breathe, and the second was the transplantation of vital organs from one individual to another. And once we got the capacity to transplant organs, as you might imagine, as we have today, huge waiting list developed, right, for this resource. And then the ventilator was invented, and suddenly we had people with catastrophic brain injuries on ventilators. And something called the ad hoc Harvard Committee to determine death or brain death came up with a proposal. They said, let's decide that all these individuals with catastrophic brain injuries on ventilators have something called brain death and are dead, and therefore we can take their organs and give them to others who need them. And by the way, I'm not hating on organ donation. I'm an organ donor myself. I'm just trying to tell the story that both Peter Singer and I agree on actually was a major turning point in all of this. So what the dean of Harvard Medical School said at the time was, it sounds like you just are redefining death in order to get more organs. We don't want to release a document that says that's what we're doing. And so they changed the document, but it's still, even with the edited document, it's very clear. And this is historically well known that this is what happened. And so what Peter Singer and I and others who are aware of this history say is, this is when we first said a living member of the species Homo sapiens, a fellow human being, did not count, was dead essentially. It did not have the same moral status as others. Because guess what, Tucker? People in these so-called brain dead states can gestate children. They can fight off infections. If you cut into their body, they release adrenaline and their heart rate speeds up. There was even this case of, and by the way, the gestating children case often happens, unfortunately, in very tragic cases where a pregnant woman gets into a car accident or something, has a catastrophic brain injury, and her body is she's able to gestate a child despite being declared brain dead. One of my favorite all-time headlines about this, it shows the confusion we have about this in the culture, is from the AP. It said, brain dead woman gives birth, then dies. So it's just like the full confusion on display in one very short headline. But maybe you remember this case from a few years ago, Jahai McMath in California. She was this African-American girl who had a surgery go really terrible for sleep apnea, had a catastrophic brain injury, and the state of California declared her dead. And her very Christian, also African-American parents said, she's not dead. And the state of California said, and her medical team, yes, she is. And by the way, according to her family's lawyer, Jahai's family's lawyer, the chief of pediatrics at, I think it was UC San Francisco Hospital, pounded his fists on the table and said, she's dead, she's dead. What is it you don't understand? She's dead. And then a few days later, she got her first period. And they managed to convince both the state of California and her medical team to essentially allow them to transfer to New Jersey, where I live, which happens to be the only state in the union that allows religious freedom for people like Jahai's family to say, I don't think this individual who just got her first period is dead, and I want to take care of my daughter. And
the other states don't allow that?
They don't allow it. They don't allow it.
What does that mean, they don't allow it?
It would be as if, from their in my view, deeply misguided view, they would say, well, you can't just say a corpse is alive, right? Like, this is a dead individual. This is a corpse. In fact, some of the medical ethics, the deans of medical ethics around the United States reacted to this case, the Jahai McMath case, saying, this is a corpse. They're animating a corpse. Who are these people? She's going to decompose, they said.
Why did it make them so mad? Why are they so many physicians, most physicians, seem like they just love death. What is that?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I think, because I want to talk about vegetation.
I know, and I want you.
No.
But I just keep 5 different times in the last half an hour you've made reference to the views of doctors on these things, and each time I have the same question, which is, I would hope that the default desire for doctors would be to see people live. And yet, I have seen it in my own life. Most doctors I know get off on death. They love death. That is just my observation. Maybe you've got a different one, but what is that?
I do think there's a strain within contemporary secularized medicine that is so ideological that if there's something that pushes back against their very secularized, whatever, I don't know what to call it, whatever the opposite of pro-life is, perspective.
Well, pro-death, I think, would be the opposite.
Is anathema, right? And so
why?
Because and this is, I mean, I want to speak with too broad a brush, but in many cases, the ideology is far more important than their oath they took to protect and care for life.
But you would just think like, okay, so this girl, they think she's dead, but then she has her period. She's clearly not dead. Why would you pound your fist on the table and demand that other people think she's dead? Or why would you push parents to abort a child with Down syndrome or spinal bifida, both of which are survivable and thrive? You can thrive with both of those things. So but why are they so vested in we must kill? Like, they're not neutral on it.
That's right.
Like, what is that?
Well, I think there would be at least two sets of reasons in the case of brain death. The first one would be unique to brain death. The other one would connect with what's called vegetative state. I think maybe offensively vegetative state, which is different. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute if that's all right. But with brain death, I think what's always in the background here is what the Harvard Brain Death Committee was concerned with, organs, right? So if we suddenly say that individuals with catastrophic brain injuries are not dead, and we still have the dead donor rule that says you need to be dead in order to donate a non-paired vital organ, like a heart, say, then the number then the waiting list for organs just goes way through the roof right now. And this is actually brought up. There have been secular champions of attempts to really call brain death for what it is, a kind of fiction. Well, originally it was a fiction that was just designed to put us in a position to get better organs and more organs. Who, when he gives talks, he routinely gets questions like, "You shouldn't be talking about this. You know what's going to be the result of what you're talking about here? People are going to die because they're not going to get organs, right, that they need. They're going to die on organ waiting lists. And so don't talk about this because people will die."
Don't talk about vax injuries because vaccines are too important.
It's a classic utilitarian perspective on these things.
But if you find yourself lying or ignoring harm to individuals on behalf of some imagined greater good, then you're just evil. I mean, I don't really see another plausible description of that.
If one has a view that what's at bottom true about ethics and morality is maximizing the greatest good for the greatest number, we can call it evil. I think in many cases it is, but this just follows logically. Why would we get bent out of shape about whether Jahai McMath is a person or not, or has human dignity or not? What really matters at the end of the day is that we maximize good outcomes from this situation.
Because that's a Nazi attitude. That's literally the attitude that they were not ashamed of. They bragged about. They wrote about it extensively. We seem to have forgotten all of this. We remember all the lessons about Poland and Czechoslovakia, but we missed the basic lesson, which is you cannot treat people like objects or else you end up committing genocide. It's like super simple. Right. Sorry.
No, that's well said. I think another angle into it, though, is this a different kind of ideological angle, which is if we say that individuals who have catastrophic brain injuries, but are clearly still functioning members of the species Homo sapiens, just like you and I are, though very seriously disabled, that has implications for human dignity that, if applied consistently, would undermine very foundational views, including with regard to abortion, right? And this is explicitly said. So let's talk, if you don't mind, about so-called vegetative state.
Yeah. Okay. So if I could, sorry.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Get
Go ahead.
so spun up, I keep interrupting you. I beg your pardon.
No.
You've said 3 times that brain death is a category that was kind of devised. It's really almost like a marketing tool in order to increase the supply of organs. But what is brain death exactly? When it's explained to laymen like me, it's they're flatlining. We're measuring brain activity and there's none. Is that real?
Yeah. So part of the problem here is there really isn't a good way to test for what's called whole brain death. In part because, and this was actually after the Harvard report came out, something called the Uniform Commission, which is a nonprofit group that has surprisingly a lot of power to propose uniform language for states across the country without federal law to sort of make sure they're basically on the same page with regard to legislation. So there wouldn't be like one kind of brain death laws in California and a different kind in New York. And so I think it was 1981, certainly the early 80s, they proposed language that basically mirrored the recommendations of the Harvard Brain Death Commission, which said brain death, which means death of the whole brain, including the brain stem, is death. And that's fine. You could say that as a thing, but then we have to find ways to determine that. And there's
to measure to see if it's true.
See if it's true. And most of the ways, especially to determine whether there's brain stem activity, like in the very center of the brain, it's just super, super difficult.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.
A trio of crises threatening to upend the race about a month before Election Day. Ports are shut down over a dock worker strike that could cost the economy billions of dollars a day, threaten jobs and jack up inflation, a chaotic hurricane recovery that has survivors desperately pleading for basic necessities. And the Middle East on the brink of war as Israel molds a response to Iran's barrage of missiles. That all begs one key question. How can Kamala be trusted to handle it all when she's still fumbling her way through interviews like this?
Former President Trump says that you've had 4 years as vice president to do all the things you've promised in the campaign, but haven't done it. Is he right?
The former president is really becoming quite desperate, and is really been offering a lot of misstatements and misinformation. And perhaps it's because he wants to distract from the fact that he has offered no plan for the American people. My plan is about building an opportunity economy. What we've got on the other side is someone who wants to distract from the fact that his plan is about giving billionaires and big corporations a tax break like he did the last time.
And here's Donald Trump showing up in Michigan to hammer her record.
As bad as Kamala's failures have been, we have a plan to fix it, and we're going to fix it very fast. If Lion Kamala gets 4 more years instead of a golden age, America will instead be plunged into a dark age. The whole world is blowing up, and the biggest threat we have is World War III, and we have incompetent people, and she's more incompetent than Biden. I was in Georgia the other day, and after the floods, and they were having tremendous problems, in particular in North Carolina. It's really, really bad. Many people are missing, and our federal government is doing so badly. If I was president, the longshoremen strike affecting the entire East Coast and indeed the entire nation would never have happened in the first place.
All right, Dana, it feels like we're entering, or we're in the midst of chaotic times. We have these three issues. How will that focus the voter?
Well, I think that, so like if you're on the fence of whether to vote, chaos can certainly lead you to just make a decision and to get out there. And early voting is starting soon. And everything we're seeing right now is chaos. So if chaos is a motivator, you look at whatever your issue is. You could say inflation chaos, border chaos, Middle East chaos, supply chain chaos, and weak leadership chaos, because that's what you ended up having in the entire Southeast region. Now that was a huge storm. There's a lot that Mother Nature can do that humans can't do, but you can respond. And the response has been late. There's just no doubt about that. And I think what's most damning for Waltz was that in his debate performance, a lot of Democrats thought, oh, he will show that there's competence coming. And the Democrats who were saying, actually, no one ever cared about a vice presidential debate. That was their words, not even people from the Trump side. And there might be some people who are Kamala curious, like, oh, maybe I would consider voting for her. But consistently we see independent voters saying, we just don't know enough about her. So she's an unknown entity. And what people want in times of chaos is seriousness. They want steadiness. They want substance. And because she is not giving them that, it's 75 days or 74 days without even really taking a significant number of media questions, the crescendo of all these chaos and crises happening all at once means, I think, that's probably working in Trump's favor at this moment.
Judge, Dana brings up a good point. We're looking at Harris, but we kind of forgot that we still have a president out there somewhere. I mean, I'm pretty sure we have a president, but it feels like the Democrats kind of left the country in a lurch. And should we trust them when they try to convince us that Harris is capable?
Well, you know, I think that one of the most stunning things to me is if you're in a presidential race and it's like 50-50, it is so close. This is a political opportunity for you to go out there and show the American public that you are on the ground, you're getting help for those people in the areas where there was a flooding, and that, you know, you're taking the part of, you know, the United States and supporting Israel because we're on the verge of a larger regional war, if not a third world war, but they're not doing that. And that the clip that you showed right in the beginning when they asked her, you know, is it did Biden to Kamala not give you the opportunity to go out there and be yourself? Because people are saying you had 4 years to do it, and you didn't do it. She couldn't even answer the question. All she did was talk about Donald Trump. And I'm surprised she didn't talk about how nice her grass was. But in the end, this is all an opportunity. And the Democrats are not taking advantage of it. So when Joe Biden says, you know, we've pre-planned for this, we've got everything ready. It's been a week. The National Guard is not on the ground. People don't have water. They don't have water. They don't have food. They don't have a bathroom. Some of them are not warm enough. They don't have medicine. You have an animal. You don't have dog food. I mean, I was through it. This is a nightmare. And you think you're in America. They're coming for you. They're going to take care of you. But in the end, Biden didn't. And we'll talk later about how he really didn't.
Jessica, you know, I feel bad for you.
Do you?
Yes, I do. It's
That's
not
new.
fair that you have to support Kamala Harris. I know probably wasn't your first choice, wasn't your second choice, probably wasn't your third, fourth, or fifth. But you had no choice with her. So you have to support her. And you can hate Trump all you want, but there was a primary. People had a choice. He became the choice. But you are stuck now trying to pretend that this person you wouldn't hire, you know, to, I don't know, babysit your kids.
Oh, I would take Mamala in a flash. The only people who are upset about the quote coronation are Republicans. These Democrats do not exist. We're happy. We're running a race that is now competitive when we thought we were going to lose. That's what we wanted out of all of this.
Answer the question.
I just did. Mamala, yes. Also
that was
happy.
a trick. There was no question.
Oh. Anywho, okay, so where's Joe Biden? Where's Kamala Harris? Yesterday she was in Georgia. Today he was in Florida and Georgia. I ran through the litany of on-the-ground facts from this response 2 days ago. But just to add to it, now Governor McMaster has said the response has been superb. Brian Kemp has said again, we have everything that we need. Florida is happy with the response. North Carolina is happy with the response. That does not mean that it is not a complete disaster. But it does mean that the Biden administration absolutely took this seriously. You say no National Guardsmen. There are over 4,000 that are on the ground, and we've had search and rescue from 19 states. As far as the media approach or what she's doing and who she's taking questions from, and you're upset at a circuitous answer, again, the voters are not upset about it. We would not be in this kind of deadlock of a race if people were annoyed about it. She's up 2.2 in the Real Clear Politics average, up 3 in 538. Nate Silver has her as the slight favorite in his probability model. And Cook Political Report yesterday put out swing state polls. She's up in 6 of 7 of them, but this was the astounding thing. For the first time ever, a plurality of swing state voters now think a Democrat will win, and that's an 11-point swing in her favor. She has the temperament to do the job. She's up 9 on uniting the country. What is so bad?
Well, I think we are all suspicious of that, given the fact that the media protects her pretty well. She hasn't really faced anything tough, nothing like the Republicans ever face. Right, Jesse?
You're right, Greg.
Thank you.
You've never been not right. I want to talk about the question that the hefty man asked her.
Yeah.
That is the core question of this election. You've been there for 4 years. Why haven't you done all the things you're campaigning on? For the last 4 years, wages haven't gone nowhere and prices have gone up. Yet, take-home wages, yet she says Bidenomics is working. Now, she has to know Bidenomics isn't working because she gets briefed by her economic team. She has to know because she reads the newspapers. We assume. So she knows Bidenomics isn't working, yet she goes and tells the voters it's working. So she's lying about how the plan's working. And if it wasn't a good idea, right, why did she cast the deciding vote for all of Joe Biden's plans? If she didn't like the plans, why'd she say, oh, yeah, let's go for it? And, you know, all her little tax gimmicks she has out right now, well, why hasn't she convinced Joe Biden to adopt them? Why hasn't she gotten Chuck Schumer to put them on the floor for a vote? Those are easy questions. She still hasn't even been asked those questions. And you look at J.D. Vance last night, he had the other best line, I thought. Donald Trump doesn't just have a plan, he has a record. And when you look at his record, there was no inflation and massive wage increases. And then if you look into the future, it's simple: tax, trade, immigration policy. It's common sense. Her opportunity economy, it's not common sense. For instance, Jessica, she wants a $50,000 tax write-off for a small business startup. Well, small businesses don't have any profits if they're just starting up. So they don't have anything to write off. Or the $25,000 welfare check to buy your starter home. That's so inflationary and just going to screw up the cost of housing in this country. And then the child tax credit, $6,000. That doesn't actually bring prices down at all. It's just more spending. So the whole thing makes no sense, Jessica. Greg is right. You were wrong. Let's go to commercial.
The child tax credit cut child poverty in this country by 50%, and the small business loan is one of the only proposals that has bipartisan support. You should watch the tape of Stuart Varney talking about how it was really good policy.
Okay, then they do it now.
Oh, now we hate Stuart Varney?
Do it now.
Roll the tape.
Why don't they do it now if it's all so great?
At what vice president set the agenda for the administration?
Cheney!
That's a great example. Also a Kamala fan.
Here we go. Coming up, Donald Trump hits back at Jack Smith's obvious election meddling.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.
All right, the dock worker strike is just one of three major crises the Biden-Harris administration is facing. There's also the severe damage after Helene and the escalating conflict in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, our current president, Joe Biden, spent 16 days in the last 2 months in that chair, I think it's a Tommy Bahama chair, at the beach in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
How lovely. Mark Meredith is live at the White House. Mark.
Lawrence, Ainsley, and Steve, good morning, friends. Later today, President Biden is set to return to the South. He's going to be touring the hurricane damage left behind from Hurricane Helene. He'll be in South Georgia, and it comes just one day after the president was in the Carolinas. The president getting a firsthand look at some of the devastation, while the Federal Emergency Management Agency says it doesn't know how much money it's going to need to clean up this damage. Also, it doesn't know if it's going to have enough money to make it through the rest of hurricane season, which stretches on until the end of November. DHS officials say they don't know how much money they're going to ask Congress for. Biden critics, though, say they are amazed that the president is making the trip while accusing him of being missing in action as Helene hit. Our latest count shows the president spending a lot of time away from Washington, and this is not a new trend. Biden's raised eyebrows before for his constant travels away from Washington. When President Trump was in office, he too was regularly criticized for visiting Florida and New Jersey on a regular basis. This week, though, the president rejected the idea that he's asleep at the wheel.
Mr. President, why weren't you and Vice President Harris here in Washington commanding this weekend?
I was commanding. I was on the phone for at least 2 hours yesterday and the day before as well. I command, call the telephone.
There's an op-ed on Fox right now from David Marcus who writes, in a normal world, Joe Biden would have stepped down by now and be free to lay on the beach in Delaware all day, which he does anyway. But these are not normal times. So until January 20th, the best we can do is cross our fingers and hope for the best. Vice President Harris, she too was touring the disaster damage on Wednesday, but today she returns to the campaign trail with an event this evening in Wisconsin. Steve Lawrence and Ainsley.
Hey, Mark, so the president snapped at that reporter who asked about, you feel bad about not being here for that crisis. And another time he said, well, I was only 90 miles away. 90 miles is how far Cuba is from Florida. So that, that puts it into perspective. That is kind of a long ways.
Well, Steve, just yesterday on the Air Force One trip down, Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary, was asked, well, is the reason you guys are going down to the Carolinas now is because former President Trump went down there. I believe it was on Monday that he was down there, and DHS said, no, that's not the case at all. We're focused on disaster recovery. The White House has also pushed back on the idea that this was disaster tourism. Instead, they wanted to make sure that they had the resources to protect security for the president, but also not take away law enforcement needs for the folks that are down there. Obviously, they got to keep looters out. They've got to make sure that roads can be reopened, allow trucks to get back in. So, Steve, the White House pushing back quite hard on the idea that the president didn't care. But as we saw in that op-ed, critics say that this is still just such an unusual time right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. Thank you, Mark. They said that the current president, Secret Service, and the security protective detail they use, it's the same as Donald Trump. So if Donald Trump is going there, why couldn't they do the same thing? And I just think it's just awful of him to condescend to reporters like that and talk to them nasty like that, saying, I could just use my phone. There's a difference from your presence being there.
From what I'm hearing on just accounts from people we've interviewed or people that have been on social media, I don't even know if they care if Joe Biden shows up. They want federal money. They want the resources. They want helicopters to go in and rescue these babies and these older people that are trapped in their homes. There's so many civilians that are doing it through different organizations and nice millionaires or billionaires or whoever
and they're putting
offering
red
their
tape
helicopters.
up for those people that are using their own private resources.
Right. They want Washington to say, bring in National Guard, bring in
the cavalry.
Whoever can help.
So yesterday, Kamala Harris pledged that the administration would cover 100% of the local government cleanup costs. And as you look at Asheville, you can just tell it's going to be a lot of money. But here's the problem. The Federal Emergency Management Agency administration apparently does not have enough money if there's another storm. Secretary Mayorkas said this yesterday. FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the hurricane season. Here's the problem. The hurricane season runs through the last day of November. They are expecting another hurricane, but they don't have enough money. And in fact, Speaker Johnson was with us yesterday, and he was talking a little bit about, it's all about priorities. If we need more money, we've got to change things around. They should change things around at the Department of Homeland Security that Mayorkas is in charge of, because they've got millions and millions of dollars not going toward Americans, but going toward processing people who are in this country illegally.
Well, I mean,
There's
so many different states
number.
that were hit.
That would help with a lot of
floods. And now we're up to $640
That money should go toward these American families that have lost everything.
I mean, there's no, I mean, if you're going to have the policy of just keeping the border wide open, you're going to have to spend more money for processing and migrant shelters and feeding those kids that are coming across the border, because you said that it was okay for the parents to come across the border. We knew that there was going to be some sort of deficit with the surge of migrants coming across the border. It looks like the administration didn't calculate that with a request from Congress, and now they don't have enough money for the things that we need, which is the American citizens in the middle of a crisis. It's pretty sad.
You know what? The president and vice president Mayorkas should announce a pause. We're going to have a pause on all the people coming into the country illegally and processing them. And we're going to reprogram that money to take care of the people here in the United States. But a couple of reports came out yesterday, and they are very damning. One of them was from the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General. And this should scare everybody. They said that CBP, ICE, and TSA did not fully assess the risks associated with releasing non-citizens into the United States. In particular, think about this. A couple of the agencies rely on people. Okay, who are you? And they give them a name. So that's going to be the name that they put on a document. And that's why Tim Walz the other day said, they're traveling in the country legally. They are in the country legally because the federal government gave them that piece of paper. The problem is, according to the Inspector General at the Department of Homeland Security, you can't trust that. And it is of particular interest because TSA, people who get on the airplane, they don't really know who they are. They've just got a piece of paper from the Department of Homeland Security that says, I'm this person. They don't know. And that's why it was quite a warning from the Inspector General yesterday.
DHS 2025 Homeland Threat Assessment says this. Over the next year, we expect some individuals with terrorism ties and some criminal actors will continue their efforts to exploit migration flows and the complex border security environment to enter the United States.
So
doesn't make us feel safe.
The interesting thing about this is that you have to layer that report from the Inspector General to the quote that we got from DHS, upset about Tony Gonzalez releasing the numbers about the amount of criminals, rapists, as well as murderers that were coming across, people that had criminal records coming from guns. And they said it was over a 40-year period. But as I told you guys during that period of time, it's a numbers game. The more people that you have coming across the border that are unvetted, the higher that number is going to be. And so on one hand, they want to dispute that big number and say it's over a 40-year period, but then you get an Inspector General report that says, hey, just a cautionary tale here, guys. Be aware this is what's coming across the border. You just can't have it both ways.
Well, the system that is in place right now is not safe. Ultimately, is what the Inspector General is saying. We can't trust the people. They could have terror ties. And when you look at this, under Donald Trump, there were 11 encounters at the southwest border. Under Biden-Harris, it is a much larger number. And when you look at the number of people who are coming into the country illegally from our northern border, it's exploded because people figure, okay, all the guards are down south. Yeah. I'm going to come in through Saskatchewan.
Can we put that number back to terrorists, though? 11 compared to 375? I mean, that just shows you a secure border. I mean, there's still going to be some people that usurp the system, but when you just leave it wide open, of course.
Those are only the ones we know.
Yes.
I mean, it only takes one to have a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
375 we know are loose in our country.
I just know that.
And we just had that Iranian ploy against President Trump.
That's right. And it's still ongoing. I just know that in politics, and both sides, you go back and forth on the issue, but there is no one that is an honest broker that believes that that Donald Trump is against a secure border. I know they keep bringing up the bill and his actions in there, but the reality of it is 4 years ago, the border was secure. And now we have these latest numbers showing us a much different tale. And I think that's why he continues to win sometimes 20 points on the issue of the border, because people know what life was like under him, whether you agree with him or not.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe.